can ban all people from any other culture, but the fact that we should give priority to Christians is an important thing, and will continue to bolster the kind of Judeo-Christian or modern Western society that we have. So I'd just like to put that question to you: is really race anything to do with it, or is it ultimately the ideology and the Christian faith which actually changes culture and changes people?
Well, I mean, this is a really vexed sort of issue. I mean, if you have a kind of a loyalty to your own people, to your own European people, I mean, the fact of the matter is, the undeniable fact of the matter is that Europeans have been Christian for a couple of thousand years now. I mean, and so there is that tradition. Unfortunately, I mean, I think it does seem to me that Christianity has undergone a substantial shift over the last 100, 200 years. I mean, and it's really become less. It's become less of a religion in the sense of being in touch with the beyond or the supernatural. And more and more Christians really see it as a way of demonstrating their moral credentials by, in effect, holding out their hand, as Reverend Nile was doing, to the poor and downtrodden of the world. And it seems to me that, in my view, I mean, that it must be a heretical sort of view of Christianity. Because I mean, it's only in the last 100 years, even the last 75 years really, that Christians have turned into open borders fanatics. I mean, the Catholic Church really is in favor of, in effect, in the United States, most dramatically, just on the basis of the alleged Christianity of the Mexican population, they are prepared to allow millions upon millions of illegals to stream across the border, and when they get there, the Catholic Church is demanding that they be turned into citizens. This is national suicide, and if that's what Christianity is preaching, I definitely want a break with the Christian tradition. I think we need to go somewhere else.
Do you want to take this?
Yeah, just a quick comment. In agreeing with what that gentleman just said, I believe you're right. If you can check the nations that have a strong Judeo-Christian faith, it actually changes that nation, and in many cases makes it the most prosperous nation and successful nation. And an example of that is Korea. And I've been invited now over the last 10 years to visit Korea, which was mainly a Buddhist nation, but there's been a dramatic conversion of millions of Koreans to become Christians. And so now the largest churches of the Christian faith of each denomination is not in Italy, it's not in Europe, it's not in America, it's in Korea. Huge churches that seat 20,000 people, a Pentecostal church, then a huge Baptist church, and a huge Presbyterian church. One church with 1 million members in Seoul, the capital. So you visit Seoul now, you have the big assembly building on the right, and on the left, a huge Christian church, 5 stories high with a huge cross, another 5 stories. In Korea. And Korea now has become one of the most prosperous nations in Asia. So I believe that's part of the benefit of the Christian faith. But not to be stupid in the way you're thinking these Catholic bishops are. I don't think that's necessarily applying the Christian faith. I think that's some denominational building the empire of the Catholic Church. I think that's
parishioner expansion.
Yeah, parishioner expansion.
Okay, yes.
I confuse Brett, my question, by saying I'm a £10 pom.
Put on a bit of weight.
Tim Kasharian. Incidentally, one of the best books I ever wealthiest people on earth who migrated to America and made a wonderful success because of the persecution of Christians, but that's by the by. I'm asking, sir, and I'm putting it to you, that the Anti-Discrimination Board are discriminating against the white Anglo-Saxons. You won't get off your backside. You won't do anything about discrimination by the Muslims or by other minority groups. For example, Muslim women being forced to wear the hijab. Isn't that the greatest form of sexual discrimination in Australia? Does anybody in the Anti-Discrimination Board say anything about it? No. Stony silence. I've written to the Reverend Nile, I've written to other politicians, state and federal, and got absolutely nowhere. Nobody wants to handle the question. I go into a shop in Campsie.
I have raced in the past.
Have you? Oh, beg your pardon, sir.
I've been shouted out.
I go into a shop in Campsie, and I'm not in Australia anymore. I've got nothing against Asian migrants. I had a very good friend who recently died, Hong Kong man. He died of liver transplant because he had hepatitis B. And he cost the Australian taxpayer a lot. He was a very, very good friend, and I cried at his funeral. He was such a good friend. But going to these shops, there's nothing in English. Now, if they're not prepared to use English as the language, what in heaven's name are they doing here? If that is not good enough for them, then plenty of planes to take them back. They benefit from coming here. They are therefore not contributing to our society. They're sponging off our society if they won't at least learn and use our language in the shop. It's discriminating, it's racial discrimination against me and the other 90% of Australians who cannot speak Mandarin or Korean. I'm talking about Campsie. And finally, there is a vast difference between the Greek, the Italian, and the Maltese migrants, who I knew quite a few of up in Mackay, big population Maltese up there. They are prepared to assimilate. But Muslims per se, in their politico-religious brainwashing, are just not prepared to assimilate. And honestly, we need them like we need a hole in the head.
Let me just start with the Anti-Discrimination Board. You probably missed some months ago there was an issue about a restaurant on the North Coast which was not serving anyone unless they were Koreans. And if you had picked up that story in the media, you would have also picked up my very strong segments about that. That it is totally unacceptable in Australia that a restaurant will not accept an Australian to come into the restaurant. So we do not discriminate against, as you said.
Well, the shops discriminate against me because I can't
Well,
read all that.
I'll come to that. I've always said it, and I've said it publicly many times, that you will find racist attitudes and discriminatory attitudes in minority groups against Australians. I think anyone who acts on the premise that it is only the minorities who are discriminated against is deluding themselves. There's no question about that. And if there's any complaint made to the Anti-Discrimination Board, I guarantee you that it will be investigated and it will be dealt with.
No, you don't, because I've been there twice against Kaiser Trap and Halali and Cronulla, and I was virtually shoved around to 8 different votes, different places. I also, I've got 12 letters at home from the Australian government departments, and guess what? Where does the native white Australians stand in Australia? You don't even know. Your letterhead with your signature told me to go and join the Scottish, Irish, German or French community groups. You run 146 community groups with your company, with
I do not
CRT.
run
Oh
any
yes, you do.
communities. I'm sorry.
And I've been to all your harmony and peace forums, and guess what? Nowhere have I ever seen anybody stand up and say, I'm representing the native white Australian community.
Well, I'm sorry. And
Don't tell me I've seen you in action.
who were you representing when you were there at those
I represent
places?
the Anglo-Australian National
And you
Community
were at these
Council.
forums.
And guess what? We can't be recognised because we're white.
Well,
in
I'm
our
sorry.
own
I
country.
think.
There you go.
All right, okay.
Why don't
Well-
you invite us and talk to us?
Can I just finish?
Well, let him respond because that was a question
Look,
out of order.
I'm sorry. I mean,
Roy McGee.
Okay.
if I'm going to say things which you do not agree with, at least have the courtesy of letting me say it. The Community Relations Commission does provide grants to community organizations to
We don't
support
want
their
any-
Don't interrupt, please.
and we have provided grants to the Celtic Choir. We have provided over a number of years to the Scottish community to celebrate their cultural events. So please, if you're going to make statements which are blatantly false, have the courtesy of saying that you're only being subjective and imagining rather than stating facts. The reason why you probably ended up in one of our forums is probably because you were invited to be there.
Where's the Australian
Madam,
community?
excuse me, we
Yeah,
have...
When we organize events, and where we invite religious leaders, we invite religious leaders from the Anglican Church, from the Catholic Church, as well as from other churches. We do not discriminate against the, as you say, the Anglo-Saxon community. In terms of the Anti-Discrimination Act, there are a lot of activities which the general public, which you might consider to be discriminatory, which you might consider to be vilification, but they may not be within the ambit of the Act. Therefore, as President, I can only deal with those issues which are covered by the Act. I cannot deal with those issues which are not covered by the Act. And religious discrimination in its pure form is not part of the Act.
Now we'll take the next question. Who's that? Come on. Yes.
So, my question was not answered.
I'm sorry, I do apologize. As far as the shops are concerned, there are labeling laws in this country.
Outside.
Which, no, they do apply to all shops. And if there's a shop which is not properly labeling their food products, they're in breach of the law. And they should be dealt with. They should be dealt with by the full force of the law. I have no sympathy for those shopkeepers who do not properly label their...
No. Come on.
That's not correct.
Excuse me, please. I can't hear you. Yes.
My question is to Mr. Kirkasharian. I read in the paper that Muslim taxi drivers are refused. I read in the paper that Muslim taxi drivers are refusing to pick up blind people who have a guide dog. What are you doing about it?
I did make statements to the media that is not acceptable. One of the senior people from the Anti-Discrimination Board, it has either written yesterday or today a letter to the relevant industry bodies to make sure that all cab drivers are informed of the requirement that they must pick up. What their religious beliefs are, whatever, it does not matter. If they're licensed to drive a cab, then they must obey the conditions under which they're given that license. There's no excuse.
Just a minute. Now look, the next question will be directed to somebody other than Mr. Kirkasharian. Yes, Greg? Yes, Greg.
Isn't the issue here really one of fundamentalism, whether it's Muslim or Christian? What bothers me with the Christians coming in, we might end up with a barking mad group of Christians. As we're finding in America, where you've got fundamentalist Episcopalians or whatever's going on over there, who now I understand don't believe the creation of the earth extended beyond 10,000 years ago. We don't need that sort of fundamentalism here either, do we? So when we talk about just bringing in Christians, we've got to be a little careful there. Bring on the Buddhists, just bringing in Christian people concerns me enormously. That's it.
Well, as far as I can see, and I've been meeting with many, many Christians that have come to Australia from other countries, and I mentioned some of them earlier from Lebanon and from the Middle East, from Egypt, and so on, are the most peaceful, kind-hearted people I know. I don't see any of those people as a threat to Australia. There may be some fanatical groups in America, in the South. We're not talking about those sort of people. That's a minority there. I believe the people we're talking about would make a great contribution to our nation. In fact,
How do you actually, using the word used earlier, how do you discriminate on belief?
yes.
How do you do that? How do you set up someone who's applying for a visa? How do you
Well, I still
discriminate?
think that that group would be such a small group that it would not be cause any trouble. In fact, something that happened the other day, I was with some Coptic Christians, and I was trying to get them to do something, and they said, we have been suppressed since 700 AD by the Muslims in Egypt, where we were the majority, and we, in a mistaken view of tolerance, welcomed the Muslims, welcomed them as a minority to come to Egypt. Until now, the Muslims are the majority, and we are the minority. And this Coptic Christian said, you know, it has affected us culturally that we have now become submissive people. And he was saying it's hard for us to assert ourselves even in Australia. So I have no fear of these Christians from these countries trying to dominate or push us around. They've been suppressed for so long, we almost have to liberate them and say, stand up. You're now in Australia. It's a free country, and you have as much right as anyone else.
Right. No, you've already had one. Somebody else, come on. Yeah, yes, yes.
David Oldfield, I'd like to ask you a question. We are not, in this area, we hear about people coming from Africa and from Europe. Do you think that we have any ideological preference for the people in the Pacific? You know, I mean, I can't think of the word. Do we have a responsibility towards our neighbours? Because we don't live in a vacuum. We live in an area, and it's the area, the region is Asia, South Pacific. It's not Middle Eastern, it's not African, it's not Europe. So how does that affect the way we think about our immigrants?
I can only tell you about the way it affects the way I think. And I mean, firstly, that is that I don't recognise them as being any more neighbourly than anybody else, particularly. My interest in people coming to Australia is their capacity to be good Australians. I mean, to a degree, Stefan and I would agree on the concept of law-abiding citizens fitting into society, being decent, etc., etc., etc. We have some barriers between us, including multiculturalism and those policies and what have you. But my interest is that the people that come here, I'm not so concerned where they come from, but what sort of people they are and how they're going to fit with the rest of us. Whether they want to be an Australian and genuinely be an Australian, or whether they want to be somebody from Syria, who is now a Syrian living in Australia. They might be they might be an Australian citizen, but they're that by virtue of nothing more than a piece of paper. And what they really are is a Syrian who lives in Australia. Wherever they be from, be they from Samoa, be they from Fiji, New Guinea, from Indonesia, if they want to be an Australian and they have something to offer Australia in the sense of being a law-abiding, working, tax-paying citizen, and all of those things that we would want from anybody living next door to us, I don't have an issue with them. I do have an issue with the problems that are going to be caused by different people that come in. And I think that we are already suffering from those problems. I haven't talked about Muslims tonight, but it's fair to say, and it has been said tonight, that there are issues in France, there are issues in Denmark, there are issues all throughout Europe, issues in the UK, and it should be understood that in all of those countries, that particular group, those people of that persuasion, are not in the majority. They do not have to be in the majority to cause incredible social upheaval. We don't have to wait for that group to be 51% in Australia.
I wasn't talking about Muslims, I was talking about all the island people.
The island people,
that are seeking,
Fiji,
you know,
Samoans,
to do
Tongan.
seasonal work.
Yeah. I know. I don't. Personally, I don't see that we have any more responsibility to them than we do to anybody else in the world. It's hard to sort of pin down responsibility based on region. I would say to you that the responsibility that Australians need to get a handle on is the responsibility to the Australians who are here, first and foremost, and that should be our concern, our government's concern. That's who we should be mostly responsible to, the people who are here and the generations of those people who will be yet born that are in this country.
This question is to Stefan Kirkashore, so it looks like I can go ahead with it. It looks like I can go ahead with this question of Stefan Kirkashore.
I think you should speak at the mic, sir.
Yes,
I
go
think
ahead.
you should speak at the mic. Because the people at the back can't hear you at all. Come on now.
Well, this question is to Stefan, as I said earlier. I apologise for my voice to whoever that was at the back. But question is dual citizenship. You have people that leave this country with dual citizenship that might go to Greece, they might go to Lebanon. There's a lot of people that come back from Lebanon after the war between the Israelis and the Hezbollah insurgents. What's your opinion between the people that might live in Greece as far as dual citizenship, the Australians, and the people that might live in Lebanon who are Australians of dual citizenship, whether when they come back after that war fled in the Middle East?
Well, I mean, all these things have to be looked at from a legal perspective. Australia changed its laws, I think about 5 or 6 years ago, where we allowed dual citizenship. You will find that many people keep dual citizenship not because of any lack of permanent commitment to Australia, but under the laws of some other countries, there are inheritance issues, and you might have migrants whose parents might be landowners, or they may have some family estate, and they may not be allowed to inherit that if they've given up their citizenship. So you'll find that there are a number of migrants from various countries which keep dual citizenship for that purpose. Now, of course, there are different facets of how this affects people. I mean, there is the issue of people going and living overseas and drawing on Australian pensions. Now, I think about 15, 20 years ago, there was a major scandal, I think, with with some elements within the Greek community, which involved social security fraud, and I think at the time the federal government moved towards a process of signing treaties with different countries. And you will find that we have treaties with various countries, including England, and recently, I think only a couple of weeks, last week, there was one signed with Greece. Now, under those treaties, there is provision for people to sort of move to the other country and draw on their pension. And I suspect that on balance, it sort of works out both ways. But my understanding is that there's a limit of 6 months anyway. So if anyone is from a country where with which Australia does not have that reciprocal arrangement, and an Australian goes and lives in that country, my understanding is that the maximum period they're allowed to live there is 6 months before their pension is cut off. That's my understanding. If they don't return back to Australia after 6 months, the pension gets cut off. Now, in terms of rescuing people from a war zone, I think, I know that there was a lot of kerfuffle. There was some statements made that these people were really living there and enjoying a good life, and when the war started, they all sort of remembered that they were Australians and they came out here. Well, I think you'll be interested to know that I don't know, there may have been one or two people, I don't know. But if you follow the news and you're interested in a particular area, you'll find that quite a large number of those people who were returned back by the Australian government have in fact paid back some of the expenses.
With respect,
Yeah.
I mentioned there was a war zone, and Hezbollah fighters were the areas where a lot of these so-called these Australians lived. People with a normal amount of intelligence would say that some of these could be aiding and abetting those Hezbollah fighters, if indeed they weren't Hezbollah themselves.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't rule out the fact that there may be people who Australians who go back to their parents' homeland, or who go to some other country and are involved in criminal acts or are involved in whatever the case may be. I have no sympathy for those people. I condemn their acts, and I think they should be treated by the full force of the law.
I have sympathy for the Australian taxpayers.
Pardon?
I have sympathy for the Australian
Well, of course I do. What I'm saying is that I agree with you that anyone who does that is involved in some activity which is totally unacceptable and should be dealt with. I'm not disagreeing with you.
Yes, Stephen.
Hello. I'll make the unusual statement that I'll ask this question, I'll direct it to the panel, whoever sees fit to answer it, or perhaps more than one, those perhaps with some knowledge of religious and ideological matters. And my question is what to do about Muslim violence. And I mention this because I think it's pertinent to the actual issue about immigration. I think part of the reason we're having problems is that with this latest group of immigrants, we're having a problem with ghettoisation and violence that we haven't seen with other groups. Now, the question my own hypothesis of why this is so, and it addresses a statement before about fundamentalism. The comment was made about fundamentalism. We could get any fundamentalist religion and we'll have problems. But I would challenge that, because if a Christian becomes wacky and you say, well, you're not really following the works of Jesus if you're doing violent things, and you can back that up. But if a Muslim is cutting people's heads off, and that's challenged to them, they can say, well, yes, I'm doing the works of Muhammad, and Muhammad, as we know, actually personally sawed off the heads of people he had captured. So it comes back, there's a core difference here between Islam and any other world religion that I know of. Correct me if I'm wrong, there's no other religion that the holiest man of that religion saws people's heads off, is there? I'm not aware of it. So my question to the panel is, what do we do about Muslim violence and its effect on immigration in Australia? And it's a particularly difficult question, because to even raise the question is to be subject to violence yourself from Muslims to demonstrate that they're not violent. And there's no other religious group I know of that has that unique paradox about it. That it takes courage to even raise the question.
Through all the Canberra and overseas, I understand, in London and so on. So I think the federal government's aware of this problem, and that's why they're trying to work out how now to license the religious teachers, the imams in the mosques, that have to be approved by some sort of a council, which the government will try and have an influence on. And they're also trying to re-educate these clerics in our Australian culture. Now, whether this succeeds or not, no one's succeeded anywhere in the world doing this. When some Muslims can find the encouragement for violence in the Quran, which is what Osama bin Laden did. I was over copies a few years ago of his instructions that he issued in their training camps in Afghanistan, and he was very devout, so that every section of the training instruction on how to be a terrorist would start off with a section of the Quran. He actually would take a section and then say, this section encourages to kill people. Now this is how you do it. And each section of his instructions to his recruits was all based on the Quran. This is now, I know, I think Kaiser Trad says he's trying to produce a new translation of the Quran and take out some of these violent sections. So whether he succeeds or not, but you almost need to rewrite the Quran. But in the New Testament,
just a minute.
someone said the Bible is just as bad, but the New Testament has replaced the Old Testament. And so the New Testament makes it very clear Christians are not to use violence. It's forbidden by Jesus Christ. He actually said to love your enemies.
Except they did during the Crusade, you see, and we're paying for that, aren't we?
They won't follow what Jesus taught.
No, that's true.
That was
It's a
a
Catholic
religious,
Church.
political. That was a political campaign. Not following Jesus.
Yes,
Yeah, I just want to kind of make a point about propensity to violence is definitely not something that is confined to Muslims. I mean, as a kind of a religion, it's definitely a militant religion and so on. But essentially, it seems to me that there may be also a kind of a racial dimension to this whole issue. For example, one of the most violent peoples in the modern world today are not Muslims, but Black Americans. Black Americans are 80 times more likely to commit a violent crime than a white person in the United States. Most of the murders in the United States are committed by Black Americans. It is important to remember that Black Americans are Christians. They have a strong Christian tradition. Now, the other important thing to remember is that when you had a strong system of racial segregation, formal or informal, in the United States, that problem was not as evident. Blacks were not as violent in the South when the South was subject to segregation as they are now. What this tells you is that when you have a multiracial society, the only way you can achieve stability and contain the potential for violence is when there is a strong ethnic hierarchy. When there's as there was in the American South or in South Africa when the whites were in the South, the propensity of blacks towards violence was contained. Once that hierarchy was deconstructed, as it was in the United States, and as it was in South Africa, basically either you get a new hierarchy or you basically just get various groups at each other's throats. Either on a kind of a free enterprise individual level, the way it operates with most black criminals in the United States, or in an organized jihad kind of way with Muslims.
Now listen, you're going to have to put off your supper for about 7 minutes. I hope you don't mind that awfully, but it's a matter of natural justice. David Oldfield would like to reply to this question, and I'm determined that the two ladies at the back will be acknowledged. Yes, David.
Sorry, I'll try and be brief to the particular question. One of the problems that we have created, when I say we, it wasn't you and me, but one of the problems that has been created in Australia is that we've now brought about laws that in many respects preclude us from even talking about what we are talking about. In fact, if we were in Victoria, Fred Nile would be in all sorts of trouble that his assaults on Muslims here tonight. Because you're not allowed to actually sort of have these sort of critical views, whether they be upheld by texts from the particular religious group anyway. So I would say that the propensity, if we call that within Islam, for violence, could not be addressed without there being substantial changes to the Quran. Well, we're not going to see that, because if the Quran was changed, it would cease to be the Quran. And for a Muslim man to live the perfect life is to walk in the shoes of Muhammad and do as Muhammad did, look as Muhammad does, wear facial hair, etc., etc., etc. You know, it's a very strict scenario. You know, we're dealing with something which, as a religion, has not evolved since it was invented in the 6th century. So we have very, very clear problems with the issue of what we see as inherent violence in Islam. And one of the particular problems we have here in Australia is that in certain areas of Australia, it's illegal to even discuss the notion that such a thing exists.
So my question is, what should we do about that? Sorry, just to be clear.
So just very quickly on this. This is a very complex issue, and there are many Muslims who do not necessarily support violence. One of the problems. They're all over Sydney. They're all over Sydney. They're all over Sydney. Well, can I just? I mean, I really love. I think some of you here have a predisposition that if Stefan Kirkasharian is going to talk, he's definitely anti this. He's definitely anti that. And he's definitely pro this, he's definitely pro that.
You are
What
the
I was-
Anti-Discrimination Commissioner, so...
Yeah, exactly. So I have to take sides, is that right? What I was about to say is that, you know, I mentioned earlier about the difference in the migration from Turkey and then the subsequent migration from Lebanon and from other parts of the world of Muslims. At that point in time, there was also international activity in terms of politicizing Islamic communities all around the Western world. And regrettably, Australian authorities did not heed the signals at the time. Now I say this with some sorrow, because if we had taken action in the early 1990s, we may have provided greater support for those Australian Muslims who did not want to go down the path of extremism.
Yes, Jane.
Okay, can I just say that I'm an immigrant? I came here in 1974 and I paid my own fare. Mr. Whitlam decided to stop immigration and I came from England. And I've been here a long time and I'm a CEO of a charitable company and I work damn hard. And I'd just like to say something about the Muslim community. My son went to a garage once and he literally was not drinking. It was 9 o'clock at night to fill his car up with petrol. And he was beaten up badly for no reason at all by 4 Muslim young men. Now, I'm a Christian and I'm let live, okay? I don't mind who comes to this country. Like you all say, you work hard and you embrace your new country. That's my motto and I'll stick to it. But anyway, what I want to say is, my brother worked in Saudi Arabia. He's an engineer. And he told me a story 20 years ago. And he said to me, I am not a racist, but I can't stand Muslims. And I said, why? Why? What have they done to you? He said, Jean, I worked in Saudi Arabia and they drive their cars on the pavement, and if you're unlucky enough to be walking on the pavement, you get killed. And I said, but what would happen to them if they killed you or somebody like you? He said, no, they don't worry about that. They go to Allah. They don't care. Their religion and their politics are combined. That's the difference. That's the difference. Now, wait, let me finish. I just want to say as well, I want to say as well, you know, they don't care, they go to Allah. This is what these terrorists are. They're young people, they don't care if they're going to die, because they're going to Allah. They don't care. They don't care. Yeah. How many is it? 19. Sorry, I didn't know how many. 19. So what I'm saying is that, yes, you're all right in a sense that the Australian government has been pretty slack in the 90s or late 80s in letting a whole lot of Muslims into this country.
Thank you.
So I think you people there are an authority, should be doing something to stop this emigration of Muslims.
Okay, look, in the interest of having supper, we're going to take the next question directly. Yes, madam.
probably still be here at 3 a.m. as they sometimes are in the upper
I
house.
don't mind that.
But no, that's fine. First of all, I'd like to say that blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord. This is a spiritual situation. The history of this planet has had people movement all over it. People have moved from nation to nation, border to border, over borders, because of so many things, usually war. And what I want to say is Australia is a sovereign nation. We are a member of the Commonwealth of Nations. The Queen is our sovereign monarch. Why can we not have the choice to say who comes here and who does not come here? We have many fifth columns in this nation. You don't need weapons of mass destruction. We have people coming here. I'm a nurse, and 10 years ago in the hospice I nursed a man with tuberculosis. I want to say there are many people that have come here from all parts of the world, from Asia, Southeast Asia and from Africa, who have never known vaccination, who are coming here with tuberculosis, malaria, cholera, all forms of STDs. Why can't we as a sovereign nation choose who comes here? What it does, if we cut down to the bone, every person that comes here from another nation has their own ideology. And it's very, very difficult to just say, forget your ideology, you're in Australia. But what we want to see are people who are willing to assimilate into this nation, to become a part of the fabric of our Australian nation.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
Who would like to comment afterwards? We all agree with that.
I have to answer that for you because the answer is really very simple. You do have the right, except you're not empowered to do it. You're not electing people to Parliament who will do anything about it, and it's unlikely you'll ever have the opportunity to do that because both the two major parties are completely in favour of immigration of all kinds and totally in favour and completely supportive of multiculturalism. So as a sovereign nation, or however you would wish to put it, you have the right to do whatever you like where these things are concerned. But you don't have anyone in power willing to pass a law that would make any of it happen. It's really a very simple situation, which is most disheartening. You can't do anything because your parliamentarians, by and large, are not